Welcome to Bible in the Backyard. Here we are in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, Dvarim Yud Bet. This chapter is, it's all about centralization of worship. And we're told that sacrifices and worship can only be done in one place, b'makom asher yivchar Hashem, right, in the place that God selects. Now, centralization has its trade-offs. In many ways, it's nice to know that, there's one concrete, discrete place that I direct my attention to when I want to worship. But centralization also means that for many people, most of the time, worship will be inaccessible. And so I was just wondering what if you had something to say about the advantages of having a centralized place for worship in the context of the trade-offs that we see.
So this is the first chapter of the law, and so it seems like very important to the book of Deuteronomy that this be the first law, right? So the whole first chapter of the first laws are about centralizing worship. And this is really distinctive to Deuteronomy, right? It may be found a couple of times here or there, once in Leviticus, there's a sort of enigmatic verse back in Exodus, but Deuteronomy keeps talking about Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place which the Lord will choose, and emphasizing that only here, only there, can sacrificial worship be done. I'll just say that the rest of biblical history tells us that it never worked, or very, very rarely worked. In the wilderness, in theory, you have this Mishkan, so it's great, there's one Mishkan. But you're actually going to live in a land that, again, is not geographically huge, but is hundreds of miles. And what does it mean that every time I want to offer a sacrifice, which is essentially the only way of worshiping, I have to travel down to one centralized place? This doesn't last at all. I mean, very quickly the Northern Kingdom breaks off, and they set up two shrines. And even beyond that, in the land of Judah, which is not that big actually, we're told in the book of Kings over and over that all the way down to Josiah, none of the kings ever got rid of the bamot. In other words, worship was never actually centralized. Josiah does it, but Josiah is about 30 years before the destruction of the temple. And immediately after the destruction of the temple, God says to Ezekiel, for example, I'll follow you into exile, I'll be your sanctuary there. So the downside is really profound.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that centralization actually breaks cohesion, right? So we have
centralization. Well, it means that you can't be local, right? There's something very nice about having a community where we worship at this shrine. If everyone has to go to Jerusalem, then it means like I have no shrine. It doesn't matter where I live. And of course, what it means in practice is that I'll actually almost never bring a sacrifice, because how often am I actually going to get to Jerusalem? Centralization really takes off only in times of Second Temple. Then there's really only one temple. But even then, we hear of a temple in Egypt. We hear of a temple, a couple other possible Jewish temples. And even down to the end of Second Temple times, this guy Onias breaks off and builds his own temple in Alexandria. So there's a lot of resistance to centralization, and I think that's sometimes missed when we focus on the need for centralization. It's a very hard thing. It's aspirationally lovely, but it's actually a very hard thing to put into practice in a nation.
It's much more complicated than the nice kind of rosy idea we all go to one place to worship.
Yeah, exactly.